And
What's the cursing policy?
This goes on to digital commons where it's accessible to the whole world.
Well,
If people agree to,
I think that falls under accessibility then.
yeah, there you go. So I'm standing in for Brad Plant, who normally does the introductions, and Walt Cluster. I'm a fan of the seminar and sustainability in general. And it's a pleasure to welcome everybody here in person and those who are online to our talk today. We'd always like to acknowledge the support of the Office of Research and Sponsored Programs and the Sustainability Council's Sustainability Research and Creative Activities Committee. And we have, this is the first of 12 exciting seminars this semester. You can download the schedule from the Office of Sustainability site, or I guess there's just one.
there's 2 copies.
There are 2 copies, 2 paper copies.
We'll have more next week.
Yeah. So without any further ado, I'm going to introduce Professors Megan Heckert, Randall Cream, and Tina from
Rosan. Yeah.
Rosan.
Yeah.
Okay, to talk about. You can read the title.
Thank you. Thank you everyone for being here. Yeah, just go very brief. Okay, now I know what happened because of the Zoom thing. It has to be reminded that it wants to do the presentation. So this is the work that's sort of collaborative work between Dr. Cream and Dr. Rosan and I. And I also want to acknowledge that the sort of template and many of the slides were also put together by Tina's students from her Sustainable Cities class from last spring. So I'm going to start by giving a little bit of background, but it's actually stuff that has been presented in this forum before.
What about some?
So I just want to say this is sort of like the start.
Somewhat.
We got
Yeah. Dr. Caterized the Star Wars person.
So thinking about the fact that we live in a
Probably there's a Spock somewhere here.
Spock and the other guy.
Yeah, there's Kirk, Spock. Okay.
That we also need to acknowledge that, again, particularly locally, we do a lot of our work in the city of Philadelphia. The future of our area is going to be hotter and wetter, and there are a number of problems that are going to be associated with that, including increased inequality. We also want to contend that we believe that community residents understand their neighborhoods very differently and arguably much better than politicians. Even local politicians who may not themselves live in the communities that they serve. Part of the challenge of thinking about planning for this hotter and wetter and unequal future is that we lack micro-scale community data that we need if we're going to make community-informed decisions about what actually happens within neighborhoods at the scale at which most of us actually live our lives. And that marginalized neighborhoods in particular are often understudied or studied by people who are not from those communities, who do not appreciate community contexts, and that presents a challenge for the research that happens. And that large-scale maps that show whole sections of the city as marginalized are used regularly and are not really very empowering, right? Members of these communities are like, yeah, we know, in fact, the ways that you're marginalized. We're kind of tired of that being the story of our community. And so we want to argue that community mapping specifically is about knowledge building and power and giving that power back to communities to be a part of their decision-making for their future. So a lot of those ideas brought us to creating the concept of PREACT, which stands for Planning for Resilience and Equity Through Accessible Community Technology. And this is a program that Tina and I have been working on for 10 years now, almost, or more. And really envisioning this as sort of a large-scale app that is intersectional and community-informed, that creates tools and processes that essentially enable communities to take existing data sets, but also add to that data about actual local conditions within their communities and use that to advocate on behalf of their communities. So we need these tools so that we can, in fact, identify the most vulnerable communities for targeted and equitable interventions and planning for the future. That is all sort of laying the groundwork there are, like I said, at least one, but really two previous sustainability seminars that are in digital commons. The last one, Tina and I did together a couple years ago, giving much more of the background for Preempt. But really want to lead that into thinking about how we get, what are the ways of collecting that community informed data. And so thinking about walking through our neighborhood as a tool and asking the question of what can walking in your neighborhood say about individual and community well-being and contribute to thinking about climate resilience. And I think this, Randall, is where I turn it over to you.
Oh. I'm so surprised.
Yes.
Yeah, if this were my laptop, I would not put a cup of coffee next to it. Knowing,
So I appreciate you not doing that for my laptop.
is that your laptop? Yeah. Hi, my name is Randall Cream. My area of research is digital humanities within the Department of English. And on this project, my role has been fairly specific, and you're going to see in the next several slides how a good interdisciplinary team can actually help amorphous projects try to make a difference by actually reaching into different aspects of people's lives and different problem areas. My role on this project is to help community members from Philadelphia tell powerful, moving stories that reflect their perspectives on their own neighborhoods. These are stories that are largely untold. The project believes, coming in, that in fact, we need data in order to make informed decisions, and that data lies partly outside of the individuals in the world around us, in the neighborhoods that we're walking through, but mostly it lies in the individual community members' response to that lived environment. So our small university. Our approach to this project is to try to capture the subjective experience of communities that reflect community members' experiences, not push down our perspectives on what a good, equitable community should look like. In order to do that, we need to find ways to empower individuals that live in those communities to experience their neighborhoods in a way that's authentic to them, and then share that with each other and with us, so that those stories can actually form a part in planning and building a better tomorrow. We use storytelling to capture these narratives, to capture these lived experiences, and those stories aren't grand narratives. Instead, we ask individuals to literally walk the block, to notice things that they see every day that fill them with joy or with sorrow or with anger. Your experience of your block is a unique experience. My experience of my block is a unique experience. And so our project asks individuals to share that experience with each other. We think that the act of acknowledging that experience, of validating it through the kind of community-based storytelling that we're facilitating in the project, empowers residents and actually connects together with other residents to create communities that are more cohesive, that can sustain the sort of resilience that the project is looking to bring together. Why does subjective data matter? We have all sorts of granular data from Google Street Maps. We can capture through sensors, we can capture pretty good heat data, we can capture air pollution, particle level data. What we can't capture is how that affects the individual. That's sort of the goal, and it is largely unexpressed through the variety of citizen-based data tools that are in existence. Preempt wants to change that. We want to notice the things that are worth noticing, and we want to capture within those things that are worth noticing the response of the community members, right? A tree that is a problem versus a tree that is not a problem. A dump that creates an issue versus, holy cow, this is great that this is here because something else used to happen elsewhere. Those sorts of the ability to express those responses are a critical component of the project. It transforms data from being disconnected and disaggregated into senses of belonging and community agency, and that's what the project's trying to do. We've already begun this project a tiny bit, like all good research projects. As we seek funding for the next stage, we have to continue to build the things that we're promising to build. One of the things that we've already done is begin the outreach project in order to more effectively gather the data that we're looking to gather. In this case, community responses to the lived environment. This last semester, the three of us taught a seminar at Penn for teachers in the city of Philadelphia, where we suggested that specific tools could be used to turn students into citizen scientists that then collect their data and tell stories about it. We came in with that presumption and we got a lot of feedback across the semester. One of the things that we got feedback on was the power of these local narratives to pull together scientific data in ways that empower the storyteller. We think that these stories clarify issues. We think that the stories link together in ways that we can't predict from the beginning. And we think that these stories are a powerful part of building a better, more resilient community in the face of climate change. These stories are based on granular walk audits that create for the individual a relationship with the environment that is transformative. Don't take my word for it. Take the word of the very overworked and underpaid K-12 teachers. We had students. We had teachers from as low as elementary with the early grades. We had later elementary. We had junior high and high school students. And to a person, the teachers expressed, as we went through the process of walk auditing, they expressed that this process builds for them a valuable tool for connecting them to the neighborhoods and students to their neighborhoods in a granular and powerful way. I think this is where I turn it
this is
over
where you go
to
talk
Professor
about.
Lewis.
Great, thank you, very awesome. What are you?
I'm
Sit down there.
Down,
aiming at the
okay,
button sign.
great, cool.
All of the buttons.
All right, nice to meet you. I'm the outsider. I'm from Temple University. My name is Tina Rosan. Megan and I have worked together for a long time. And just a little bit of context is like, we initially started doing this research around green stormwater infrastructure, and we developed what we called a Green Infrastructure Equity Index. And it was really a large scale mapping project to identify neighborhoods that really needed this investment. And from that, we realized this large scale mapping kind of left this gaping hole, right? Community residents were sick of hearing, yeah, we don't, thanks for the map, we know that already. And so there's this need for ground truthing. So we've subsequently identified the walk audit as one of the numerous ways of getting more community data. We've also looked at low cost air monitoring, but really what we're trying to do is work with people to build the skills, build the tool set they need to advocate for themselves. And in a class that I teach at Temple called the Urban Environment, we worked with the city of Philadelphia because the federal government, and this is the Biden administration, was interested in putting a cap over 676, the Vine Street Expressway. And we worked with the city and some community groups from Chinatown to kind of identify opportunities. Like if you were to cap 676, what are some neighborhood opportunities? So I'm just going to quickly show you how my students use this concept of a walk audit to view the neighborhood. So what we did is we went down to Chinatown and I broke the students up into groups, And I love, they told me the temperature when they did it, right? It was 4 to 5 PM. It was a really nice day. And that's important because your experience of the city changes. What if it's 104, right? If it was August, we have a very different sense of what's happening. So thinking kind of seasonally, how neighborhoods change is important. So I tried to give them a small kind of area to work with. And then I used the framework of a SWOT analysis, which is strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And so I had them kind of look in the walk around and see what you see. What's the strength, right? Sense of community. They saw churches, schools, a welcoming center, a food pantry. They looked at arts, local arts, Asian Arts Initiative, Philadelphia Young Playwrights, Howard Center for the Arts. They saw a lot of murals, right, that were about community. They noticed there were 2 bus stops. It was close to the train station. They looked at some of the housing options, trying to identify what was affordable, kind of indicators of gentrification. They also looked at walking distance to restaurants, to community centers. And then they found them in the neighborhood. They took photos of them. They also started to look for concerns, right? It's actually kind of hard to walk around this neighborhood because the sidewalk is not ADA accessible. There's a ton of new construction going on, right? So you can see this picture. It's actually hard to walk around. The crosswalks were missing. There's no place to throw your trash, and the drivers were insane to the point where a student, myself and another student, we almost got run over during this trip. So that's like one of those, remember that you are in the world. It is a real classroom, and there are some risks. So here's a picture also of, this is a tree pit, but I don't see a tree, right? So the cars are going, there's a big highway in the middle and cars are going on both sides. So the highway's below, you're hearing it, very noisy, and on 2 sides you're seeing cars coming, and there's a lot of construction. And there's not a lot of green space or shade trees. So that's just from looking around. And then my students basically use this to report back. And I think one of the things that we talked about, this is about environmental problems, but this is also identifying environmental solutions. So as you're looking for things that are challenging in the neighborhood, you're also looking for opportunities. So they found parking lots that could be redeveloped as affordable housing. They also, kind of made the case for why this Vine Street Expressway is an environmental injustice. They saw evidence of displacement in Chinatown, something to be aware of as the city caps this section of Vine Street Expressway. What are the future challenges around gentrification? How is it going to reduce air pollution? What about noise? So these questions there. And then this sort of parking situation, and this was also during there's a lot of conversation about the new arena. Where will people drive and where will people park? But they found, a lot of these parking lots might be opportunities for affordable housing. And actually some of the students, when we went back to the city, suggested doing some land swaps. Maybe this is where the city sort of tries to do a land swap and think about building affordable housing. And we also talked about some of the ideas about doing tax increment financing around these projects. They were also questioning the idea of cars, right? So this whole project is trying to cover the highway, and that means you really need to make a commitment to remove cars, narrowing the streets, making more walkable, but also improving public transit, and getting rid of these excessive parking lots and trying to think about other uses for that. So this is just looking around the neighborhood, using the SWOT analysis, and really doing this walk audit just in a 2-block area. They also saw some opportunities. There's some schools there. There's, maybe there's art programs. If we do cap the Vine Street Expressway, there's going to be awesome green space. How do we program it, right? Is it going to be after school? How do we work with the Asian Arts Initiative and the Hawaii Folk Culture Center? Let's talk with them. So this is kind of thinking about the planning process that we'll have to go through. And, you know, and then kind of thinking creatively about what to do with this excessive parking. So this idea also is used, I don't know, how do I get in here, sorry. Okay. Okay, awesome. And then I just scroll.
Yeah.
Wait, let's see, I'm sorry, I'm back. So the Clean Air Council also has a project called Feet First Philly, and they've done these walk audits around Philadelphia. And here you can see they invite residents out and they talk about what do we want to see? You know, here's how do we advocate for pedestrians? You know, they're counting cars, they're looking for where they can put green stormwater infrastructure. They're seeing how long it takes to cross the street and how many times someone almost runs them over. They're looking at, you know, the parks and the opportunities. So all to say that there are a lot of people, not just us, thinking about using this walk audit as a tool. It can be used, what's really cool about it is it can be used by really anyone. You could go after this talk, do your own walk audit. And Megan is going to show you how to do that, so thank you.
We can't, walk auditing, to go back to this image, can be very low tech. It can be literally just walking around with a notebook, but there's also some cool tech that can help you think about how you would do a walk audit. So for example, these images show a survey. This was actually something I used in a class on geographic field methods last fall, but it was about, we were measuring air quality around campus. And so we developed an app, or a survey app, used a survey app to basically be able to go out around campus with a sensor in our hands. And then at each of the particular points, we would stop, we would mark the location, and then input in the survey all of that information, which we then had available to map after the fact. I'm not going to show you those maps because it turns out this can take a fairly long time, and we managed to map 4 points in a little over an hour. So the maps aren't that interesting. But I have some other stuff that is interesting, which is that you can go from information that's collected like this through survey apps when it's tied to location, and then create dashboards. So this is a dashboard related to a completely separate project that is actually mapping the happy places of people on campus. But of course, that's also part of the walk audit in terms of thinking about the benefit, the opportunities and the strengths of a community. And so I want to show you. And the cool thing about these dashboards is they can be very interactive. So for example, this survey was taken by faculty, staff, and students. And you can click on any of these to see, to sort of narrow it down. So you can find out that students, there are a lot of students who don't have a happy place on campus. And that's unhappy. Sad. It is. Faculty and actually staff are much more likely to have happy places, or at least those who are willing to talk into the survey do. So there's just really interesting ways that you can then interact with this data. So if you think about dashboards as really being around decision making, imagine this dashboard that also had air quality data, that also had markers of people's specific concerns on campus. And speaking of people's specific concerns on campus, I did want to take a moment to do a little, to let you do a mini walk at it without actually walking anywhere. So if you can pull out your phones and follow this QR code, this is the part of the presentation where I'm always like, I hope it works the way that I meant for it to work. You will find a little survey which will give you an opportunity to mark a place on campus that you have some level of concern about. And then I don't have it set up to go to a dashboard, but I can show you a little bit of what that data looks like after you give us your feedback. You don't know yet.
Hard to get to parking lot, it's more parking.
Or that's a whole thing.
Shuttle to Amtrak.
Wait, I'm thinking of,
Sure.
is this?
There's something called grace notes.
Things you learn when you do a virtual walk.
That's university, it's over here, right? That's, yeah, like, is it like that? Up with your, like, how would they go? Yeah, and it's probably also drive there.
Yeah.
Everlow intersection.
Okay, I'm just this up.
I'm gonna say no. No, literally. Because you can never turn right. Functional, I guess. My other location, give it. Because when we get to the microphone.
Oh, yeah, I think it is.
What's the story there?
Immediately after.
I will
Yeah.
never.
I will say, I know that the map is a little bit challenging, like I had to do this because you're sitting in here, you can actually also get it to use the GPS in your phone and say where you are, but obviously we don't want all of the points set up in this classroom. I mean, unless we do, I don't know.
This is a very concerning classroom.
So I had to push pin with it.
I'm in Tennessee.
Something really wrong going on there.
That would be really good.
All right, shall we take a look at, I'm curious to see. Oh no, the controls are in my way though. So, those were the 3 points that I seeded it with. We should have more data. Okay, so now we can map all of the places you just showed us. And looks like High Street and Rosedale is the area of concern. And we can do other, like, so this is all just within the survey application. Like I said, we could create a dashboard, not do that in real time for you. But just a little bit of quick, always curious. So this is cool. You can do a word cloud. So we can see what are some of the, as you described, what you're concerned about. It will probably come as no surprise to anyone in the room that parking is high on the list of concerns on campus. Going right with pedestrians and intersections, and we can see the levels of concern. We're working with minimal data here. But you can see there's this is pretty powerful in terms of like in real time, you can go out, collect data, and then look at it and pull together visuals and use that for analysis later to make for decision making. So, why do we think you should do this? Obviously, we started with a whole lot of starts of reasons why we sort of got into this work, but we wanted to highlight a couple of particular additional benefits of doing walk audits that we want you to consider as you're thinking about whether or not this will be effective. Do you want to talk about climate anxiety?
Sure, I can. So I think just in the same way as when you go and you talk to a community resident, you show them a map of how hot their neighborhood is. You get people kind of look at you and they say, thanks, that really doesn't make me feel great. The problem with kind of what we know is coming about climate is it's very kind of angst producing, in part because we feel helpless about it. And one of the things that researchers who think about climate anxiety are increasingly arguing is that the best way to kind of combat climate anxiety is to learn this idea of efficacy, right? So you learn how to be effective, right? So if efficacy is trying to do something and succeeding. So if, for instance, you take the map that Megan just showed us and a group of you get together and you say, hey, president of Westchester University, there's a huge concern about X, and you make a call for that, and then someone listens to you. In the process of doing that, in the collecting the data and asking the question, collecting the data, kind of identifying the problem, thinking about solutions, taking it somewhere, getting the feedback, kind of having that struggle with them, coming at an outcome, you learn a skill, right? And that skill is about change. And in doing so, you realize that, yes, it is climate is a huge thing. I'm not gonna solve climate on its own, but I know how to operate in this world. I know how to, so you're learning about kind of political effectiveness and mobilizing. And I think that's something as teachers that we think is really important. That's really what we pass on to you, because you go out in the world and get the jobs and collect the data and but you have to feel like you can do it. So that's one of the reasons I love the kind of more local focus of the Walk Audit.
And then, so there's that idea where there are these big problems in the world that can feel very overwhelming. And so taking this smaller scale approach can help make it feel more doable. I want to highlight this from another perspective, and thinking about my own experience as someone who grew up in Philadelphia and was always very interested in the environment, but also kind of felt like it was this big thing that was out there. It wasn't really part of my world. And the thing about doing walk audits is that it becomes a really good entry point to thinking about the environment, because it's local, because it's your community. There's a sense of connection and ownership of those problems that doesn't necessarily exist the same way when you're thinking big global issues that aren't necessarily being personally felt at the moment. So both, it's something that if you're thinking big and global and you're overwhelmed, it can help you, but also if you're thinking big and global and like, well, it's out there, I don't care, it can also help you to sort of get your entree into thinking about what impact does the environment actually have on me, what's happening locally that is meaningful to me, and then from there, and how does that connect to these larger issues. So I hope at this point that you're all convinced that you want to start doing walk audits. How would you do that? So glad you asked. So this is a tool from a group called America Walks. And so I think it's a good sort of set of steps that you should consider. So the first one being set some goals, right? You can't do everything in your walk audit. So figure out what are your priorities. And then pick your place, thinking about, okay, so even if you're doing a walk audit of campus is actually fairly big, right? So think about, are there particular areas of campus that you really want to focus on? Because you want to get as deep as you can into what's happening there. And keep it short. So both in terms of the amount of time you're out there, but also this is related to the location that you choose. Like I said, doing air quality measurements, because the sensors, you want to let them calibrate each time, because we're trying to do good science here, right? And make sure that our numbers are accurate. We managed in 47-degree weather to get 4 measurements in an hour on campus. Now some of that also because I was teaching them how to use some things, but still, realistically, you want to sort of be realistic in terms of what you're setting out to do and how long it's going to take. Curate your crew, right? So figure out who is part of your team. You should have members of the community in your team, right? Again, it shouldn't just be outsiders who are coming to look at and decide for themselves what's happening in a community. You really, the whole concept of this is about getting people involved in and talking about their own spaces. Bringing in local leaders, always really valuable. Like I can imagine a class here that, yeah, let's bring Dr. Vernatsky in at some point to do a walk audit to get her perspective on things. Using tools. So choose, what tools you're going to use. If you want to use the survey that we looked at today, build that, figure out what questions are going to go into it, be comfortable with that before you go out there, right? Because obviously it takes more time if you're figuring out all the things in the field when you're also out there. Grab gear, so make sure you have everything you need. You should always, even if you're all just have your phones and you're doing the survey on your phone, you should always have analog backup because things happen. You never know. And also because sometimes when you're out there, if you build a survey, this is one of the downsides of a survey, you have very specific questions that you can answer. It doesn't leave as much room for like something happens or you see something that you weren't expecting to see and you want to make a note of that too. So always have a notebook and other analog ways of collecting data when you're out there. Be universal is how they're saying it, but thinking about safety, trying to think about all of the possible people who might move through spaces, right? So not just yourselves and your own safety, but think about safety for others. So for example, Tina's example of their walk audit, noticing that sidewalks were not ADA compliant. Potentially an issue for some of them as sidewalks were being blocked, but also even more significant issue for someone with mobility disabilities. Step 9, take pause. Stop every few blocks, right? You shouldn't just be, the goal is not to walk your route as quickly as possible. It's to actually, take a few steps, stop, experience and feel what's going on in that area before you move on. And then lastly, chat and assess. So make sure that you kind of have time to sort of debrief and process just the experience with everyone. Obviously, there are longer term conversations to have and data to look at, but it's always good in the moment. That's when your memory is freshest to have those conversations, because as much as it feels like, oh, I'm not going to forget that, trust me, you will forget things that happened on it. So take the time, build that into the time you're planning to spend on your audit to kind of talk about what happened after the fact. That's it.
We have plenty of time for questions, yes.
I'm just making it so people, you can see those on Zoom if they want to ask questions as well. Just gonna make it a little bit bigger.
I have a question. What were some of the biggest challenges that you faced while working on this? I mean, was it getting students interested initially? Was it, doing the audits themselves?
I mean, one of the things Megan talked briefly about the pre-act project. So one of our challenges is, so we had a National Science Foundation grant to do community work about building a large scale tool. And I think one of the challenges is we have very grand, big ideas about how all this data can be connected. And so trying to figure out which bite to take, because in some ways this project has so many tentacles, you could do air quality monitoring, so it's interesting, because I think where we've sort of landed, even though we started big, we've really landed with the best thing we can do is bring these tools to people and help them advocate for themselves. I think initially we kind of thought we're gonna make this big grand tool, it's gonna be still doing that. We're still doing it, but I think so that tension between big data and community data and who builds the data, is a challenge. I think for students, it's like an easy win, it's like you guys are out there you're really doing this all the time. Oh, I hate this corner. And it took you guys 4 seconds to answer these questions, right? So everybody's doing this work. It's like being able to do it and put it somewhere, Right now, a lot of cities just want you to make a 311 call, right? Just to complain about something. This tool allows you to mobilize with your friends and do something more than just complain, but it might also be solutions oriented.
I would add one other thing for anyone who's thinking about sort of leading a walk audit is, by nature, because it's intended to be bottom up, you're sort of ceding control over what actually is going to happen. So for example, when we were doing the workshop in the fall with teachers, we they had 4 groups and we assigned them very specific things that we wanted them to look for. And one of them was traffic, and we had certain ideas in mind, and the 2 teachers who decided to look at traffic marked how many different out-of-state license plates they could find, right? So and we have theories about this, but the point being, people will see what they see, not necessarily what you expect or plan or want them to see. And that's okay, because that's part of the point too, right? That it's the community telling you what they think is interesting. So you have to cede a certain amount of control in this kind of a process.
There was a message in the chat.
Oh, yeah.
I think they said, are there any plans to do this in the borough? Or fix these problems? A little more call to action.
I will say that in one of my classes this spring, I already do walk audits around campus. Basically the class is focused on doing the audits, so what comes of that data will be a challenge that I will present to my students. We also have opportunities that our department will talk about later in terms of doing, it's not technically a walk audit because it's also done entirely virtually. But we've gotten involved with a group called Project Sidewalk, which is trying to collect data around sidewalk and walking hazards. And so we're gonna have some mapathons to try and pull that data together, because again, it's hard to advocate for change if you don't have the data to show that a change is needed. So it'll be doing things like identifying where there are no ramps on sidewalks, or where there are no sidewalks, or where sidewalks themselves are tripping hazards, right? Again, things that we know exist a lot in this area. So that'll be, again, collecting data to be able to ultimately make change, but it's not a direct, here's the plan to change things.
So we got a large contingent of chemists here. So first to them, to think about, you may generate toxicological data or epidemiological data or environmental data, air quality analysis, things like that. You may have never thought of, how do I speak to somebody who's not a scientist, or at least not a physical scientist like me? So one thing I'd like you to take from this is to think about, how would you interact with people and make your data understandable? Because you're going to have to do that in your center too. But also to you, how do you interact with getting, you said, just the math of the numbers isn't very effectual. So how do you talk to people outside of your discipline or specialty, and how do you incorporate that into this more touchy-feely?
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the challenges that we're still sorting out, right? Thinking about how do we, because part of it is also how do you take that more touchy-feely information and then put it into a map in a way that is both potentially quantifiable, but also not acknowledging that we actually care about the qualitative component to it too. So there are other tools which I didn't show, called, like, for example, story maps, where you can place people's stories, whether it's videos or text or audio of what they said, into the context of a map, so you can see sort of where they're pointing, where the story that they're telling you is happening. And lots of different kinds of maps and things that you can make that would be, that depending on the kind of data you have, would be more or less effective at communicating or making the point that you want to make.
You ever try to do a quantitative, qualitative sort of comparison? Oh, I've got some data here on ozone levels, and what we find in that area is people feel this.
Yeah, so that's among the things that I am planning to build into the walk audits that I'm doing this spring with my students. So I have not air quality sensors like the ones I use in the fall, but I also now have decibel monitors and temperature guns to get surface temperature in addition to air temperature, but also as we go around, specifically trying to rank how relaxing is it to you to be in this space? How, like, what is your dominant feeling here, right? And so ultimately then you can make comparisons, you can code what they say about feelings, you can take the number they say on a scale of 1 to 10, how relaxed are they, and try to see to what extent those things correlate with, particularly with specific environmental factors in that area.
I want to add, during COVID, we had what we called the Breakfast Club, which was this group of North Philly. There's something called Registered Community Organizations in Philly. So it was a group mostly of women, African-American women, who were like very frustrated that no one was listening to them. And initially we had started this work with the Clean Air Council, and it was about air sensors. And what became clear was they were less interested in the air quality because they felt that the most important thing was trash and illegal dumping. And I think as researchers, it was important for us to shift to say, yes, we are still interested in air quality, but we're talking about environmental justice, and it includes all of this, right? So so we use some of our, like I had some students make story maps and videos around illegal dumping in Philadelphia and try to help them with the advocacy. And it's through that work that they are actually collecting local data. I'm beginning to see that local data is really important for advocacy, and that's the same thing we want them to do later with air quality. So it's meeting people where they are, I think, is like a key lesson as a researcher. And it requires that sometimes you have to pull back, right? I might be interested in climate resilience and solar panels and reducing greenhouse gas emissions and stuff, but actually I'm gonna talk about garbage, right? For a long time, we're gonna really mobilize around garbage because that's what residents want.
Hi, have you seen log audits affect community dialogue? I know that it's only recent that you've really initiated the program. There's already one in Philadelphia that you've gotten involved with. I was wondering if you've seen any impacts on community and community to local government dialogue?
I mean, I think for us, it's hard to say at what moment we because we've been doing this for a while, but in different ways. It's kind of only recently that we have turned to the walk audit as, I mean, we originally started out as taking large scale maps about environmental justice indicators, and then wanting to tag onto that like low cost air quality sensing. And then through these meetings with people, we realized a lot of it was about garbage and helping them see their neighborhood. So then it sort of, the walk audit was really our way to kind of get in through their eyes, see what they're seeing in their neighborhood. And so, you know, we did some advocacy with those groups. Now, can I say, oh, this definitely caused that? No, but I do think there is a lot of momentum around illegal dumping that we, like, through these conversations we were a part of. So I think, you know, I think being a researcher and just making yourself available has been really important, and helping people know that, like, you know, we have students who can make story maps, and we can help we can help gather these, you know, send your, like, one of our colleagues at the Clean Air Council, if you see garbage, Russ Zerbo would like you to text him the picture and he will go to bat for you. So it's like that through those connections with our like advocacy counterparts, we're able to get that local data to the people who do the advocacy work. It's not always us doing that.
Okay.
But I do want to also share a story from the workshop with teachers as well. So this is not a direct, this happened, but one of the teachers that we were working with, as she developed work plans for how to do the walk audits in her community, was really thinking about part of her walk audits being having her students talk to community elders and get their stories. So really using that walk audit process to try to build connections between the school and the students and other members of the local community. So she hadn't done it yet, it was just the plan. But there's definitely sort of this idea of a vision of how that could work.
That sounds very exciting.
Historically, the two groups have used walk audits effectively, super effectively, and they kind of there's some overlap between the two groups. Old folks, the AARP, have used walk audits nationally, basically to make the neighborhoods that folks live within more responsive to what it's like to navigate that neighborhood as an old folk. Also, folks with disabilities, in response to the ADA, used walk audits to basically change the physical infrastructure of their neighborhoods. So we're building on some historical successes in that way.
So we like to take a pause at around 10 of to allow people who need to go to their next class to do so. But if it's agreeable for the speakers to stay until 12 to answer any remaining questions. Meanwhile, we can. I'm gonna do that as best I can.
Did a great job. I'll stop the recording here.